Thank you so much for joining us on Brand Equity. Truly a pleasure having the McKinsey men on ET Now. Thank you so much, Jason Heller and Brian Gregg.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
You're consultants. You are the global digital lead. You are a senior partner, heading the marketing practice. What does your job role entail?
Put that in the marketing context,
Yeah.
right? That requires a sophisticated suite of marketing capabilities, right? To drive growth from data activation and data management, from agile marketing and execution, from media optimization and experience optimization. So value chain of marketing, the consultancies, we're part of that value chain.
So interesting. All that you just told me is technically what an agency should be doing. Am I correct?
Debatable.
Yeah.
Debatable?
Some agencies look at their role of driving growth from a business perspective, and other agencies focus on the work itself. And I think there's room in that ecosystem, in that value chain for both.
So help me understand how you operate. Let's say you have a client A, and they have their individual agencies, creative, media, etc., digital. So where are you in the mix, and who do you collaborate with, and who is your conversation with?
Well, it really is helpful to restate what I said. We are counselors to the CMO, the CEO, the C-suite, and the board. So to your question of who are we working with, it starts there. That's where the partnership begins.
Okay.
Number two, we're often there to drive a step change in trajectory of growth. Okay, so that's the mandate. Go drive growth, which by the way is increasingly very hard to do. Number three, we're there to build capabilities. So to this question of who else are we working with, up and down the marketing value chain, our job is to instill and embed capabilities that last far beyond our relationships. And so often that's working directly up and down with senior, mid-tenure, and junior marketing teams. Often it's their counterparts, and increasingly so, and this is, I think, to Jason's point, we're working across the C-suite because the CMO and the marketing team can't survive or succeed without the help of the IT function, or without the help of the analytics function that often doesn't sit with marketing. So it doesn't only go deep, our relationships often go broad, because that's the only way to drive the growth agenda.
When you say it's deep and it's broad, you're talking to me from the client point of view, that you're working with the client deep and broad, correct?
That's
so
correct.
You have actually no real conversation or meeting point with their agency partners.
So we do, in the context of the fact that they're part of that support network, and so we're not replacing or displacing agencies. In fact, we work alongside agencies as they're managing media, they're doing creative, they're creating the output. We're helping with the orchestration and the optimization of everything from their processes, the way that they spend money, the talent that both internal and external that clients are allocating to the way that marketing is being executed. And at the end of the day, this is becoming an exercise that's increasingly important to CMOs, CEOs, CFOs, because marketing is now a predictable lever of growth. And because it's a predictable lever of growth, we're working with the senior level clients to then say, okay, what does the rest of my organization need to do to transform in this era where we are more responsible for driving growth and not just producing advertising?
So what has really changed? Why is it that consultancies like yours have plunged into this space? What's changed over the years? Because this was not a relevant role for consultancies such as yours, let's say a decade ago, right? So what has changed in the business landscape? What has changed in the marketing domain that we need consultants to be orchestrators of sorts?
Well, so a couple things have changed. It's a very good question. I think number one, in our research that Jason and I just conducted actually showed this to be true, is the role of the CMO has changed.
Okay.
Let's start there. 3 to 5 years ago, when we were doing interviews with CMOs and asked what's the job function that you're trying to perform, number one, it was to protect the brand. Number two, it was steward the brand equity. Today, when you ask CMOs what their job is, it's to steward the growth agenda. It's to drive top line performance. It's a very performance oriented. So that's change number one. Okay. A couple other changes around the CMO is happening too, though. Think of the way consumers are shopping today. The entire complexity that goes around shopping or commerce, and even the way in which consumers engage with media, completely changed. And so in this world of uncertainty and new capabilities, it's a perfect opportunity for CMOs to not only up-level their skills, but for counselors like us to come in and help them accelerate that path.
But my question is, and don't get me wrong, I'm just trying to understand what you do. How are you the right counselor?
Well, we've been the right counselor for the biggest, hairiest problems that clients have faced for many, many years. And I think that the question is really, why has marketing now become that big, hairy problem that consultants are trying to solve? And I think there's a few answers to that, including the fact that the predictability of how to make marketing actually drive predictable growth for the organization is different today than it was 10 years ago, right? And the skill sets and the need for sort of an ecosystem management and orchestrator to solve those problems is different. And agencies are trying to solve some of those things. Consultants, have tried to solve them from different angles, and I think those two worlds are getting closer. They're not colliding. I think there's a lot of hype around there of like, the consultants are coming, the consultants are coming. I mean, we're all in the business of serving clients and creating growth in some capacity, whether it's an agency building a new ad campaign, or some of the consultants that are building agency-like capabilities to do that, or consultants and even analytics firms that are using data and advanced analytics to mine out where the opportunities are, where the leaky buckets are, and new consumer insights to create new products, new go-to-market strategies, new ways of optimizing media allocation, talent allocation. I mean, this has become a massive, hairy problem in an era that's really, really hard to drive growth, where everybody from the CEO on down has a lot more riding on their shoulders. There's a lot more demand from the market to perform. And therefore, marketing has become this lever that, I don't want to say it's easier to move. It certainly has become more predictable.
In fact, we surveyed over 200 CMOs, asking the question, how does creativity survive and thrive in a world of data? Yeah, that was the question. What we found is that those CMOs and marketing functions that have combined their analytics people, think of this as the data-driven, more analytical folks, with their creative talent, actually perform twice as well as peers. Can I say that again?
You can, because it is way too technical and too much a jargon, but I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions on what you just said. So that's interesting. First, I want to talk about the fact that everybody's talking about data, and data was the buzzword, let's say a few years ago, about how it's going to change the way, marketing as a function operates. However, I need to ask you guys, over the last couple of years, we've seen some key global events, such as the US presidential election, such as Brexit. And if we had to go by data predictions, I thought data has completely failed us, because none of these actual happenings was predicted by data. So what are we talking about? And I'm very confused when people say that data analytics is the way forward, because it hasn't served us right on many an occasion.
So I guess we'd start by saying it has served us right in a lot of occasions as well.
Such
right?
as?
I mean, it's not perfect. Every day, sophisticated marketers are using that data to predict consumer behaviors, to increase the lifetime value of a customer based on their behaviors, based on the behaviors of other people who share certain characteristics with that person. And we see that all the time. Data is not perfect, first of all, right? And when you think about some of the big things that you're talking about, like the presidential election, Brexit, what have you, there are factors in there. I mean, we can't comment to the models that these companies have used, in polling and in creating the predictions. There's a lot of X factors, but when you have control over data, more often than not, what we found is that data is able to increasingly predict the behaviors that you're looking for. It's not perfect. And by the way, marketing doesn't need to be perfect. Marketing is not the presidential election, thank God. But it does give us the ability to,
But isn't it funny? If for a moment, you remove your McKinsey hat and ponder upon the fact that today we have so much data compared to ever, right? Mankind has access to so much data. Yet, as you were saying earlier, that this is the toughest period because it's very difficult to grow for any business. The marketplace has become so difficult, despite the fact that we have access to so much material. Isn't that a bit of an irony?
You could look at it as irony, but I think we have to be a little careful when we say data is the savior to all problems.
Okay, so it isn't.
I would think it's a piece of it.
Yeah.
It's an ingredient. It's like you're in the kitchen. To dumb it down, we're in the kitchen, right? We've got some eggs and milk, but it's not going to be a better cake just alone with the new eggs and milk. You've got to be able to mix this together with other ingredients to turn out the cake you want to bake.
And your other ingredient would be creativity.
Well,
I knew we'd get there, Sonali.
It's creativity, it's talent, it's the
You actually
integration
know the
of the
3-part
operating
recipe.
model, right? I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, data is useless in its raw form, right? It's the insights that come out of that data, which means the quality of your models, the time you put into it, the data scientists that are running that, what use cases you decide to use that data for. And there's garbage in, garbage out. There's a lot of bad data out there too, and so to take a thoughtful approach, and I think this is ties back to the research that we did, where it's taking that data and analytic capability, pushing it to the front lines with the people who are executing marketing to say, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't such a good idea. We want to use these insights. We might not use these other insights. I think it's that integration that makes this work. And some CMOs have even told us, hey, if I leave it just all to the data guys, I think it might suck the soul out of my marketing, right? And that's not the answer either. Like, the pendulum can't swing all the way to data. It's in fact we found the integration was actually the accelerator. When these things are integrated together, we see a difference in the performance of the companies compared to those who have the capabilities but operate them in isolation. To me, that was one of the most important takeaways of what we just did.
Well, fair enough. I mean, that sounds all right, but I mean, give me some real life example of the fact that there is evidence that
Sure.
both of these fused together is a better output, and actually a better output in terms of impact on your bottom line.
Sure.
So I can share a story. Jason and I both have stories. I mean, we were just working recently with a retailer, global retailer.
Could you name?
No, we don't share our clients' names, but what I can tell you is the CMO had historically struggled to get the analytics talent and the creative talent together. These are often people who didn't play together on the preschool playground together. They're not of the same ilk all the time. But over time, what she did is created a process, an agile process by which they were sitting together in the same space, working the same problem together. She actually found that call center data, of all data, this is the data that consumers call in and complain about the product, right? Exploring patterns in that data uncovered new sentiments that consumers had, new touch points that they were unhappy with, and it was a great feeder to the creative team. They took those insights and they created an entire new creative experience around it, a new campaign around it. So it was the combination of the two that got to that unlock.
So what was your role in that?
In that case, we played a number of roles. Number one, we helped set up the process by which these two teams were able to sit together and work together. No easy process. I would say accelerator, actually. Much more than facilitation if it comes down to it. Setting up the right roles, understanding the process, and feeding the insights to the right people at the right time. That would be number one. But number two, what we did is we often helped each of the individual roles when they needed it to round it out. So oftentimes, the data and analytics folks need a little horsepower. We were there to help accelerate that. Similarly, the creative talent needed to know how to bring that insight and frame it in a way that was a consumer-centric view. We helped do that. So there's a couple ways that we support these
basically,
clients.
your role is the role of an articulator. You articulate.
I would look at it as translator,
Okay.
right? So we are taking a business problem. We're looking at a suite of solutions and translating how those solutions turn into an operational reality, right? And that's hard, right? Particularly for companies that have a lot of history and legacy in their process and their mindsets and in their org, right? We'll do everything from help the org restructure. The marketing org, I should say, will create the operating model that enables marketing and technology and other aspects of operations to work together in a cohesive, autonomous way to go create impact and new products and new marketing in new ways. And we'll also, and I'll use another example in this case. We'll also take a company like one of my clients is a big data-driven bank in the U.S. A company that had all of these capabilities sitting in isolated parts of the organization, and help them operate day to day, helping them come up with ideas and put the structure and rigor around, how do those ideas fit into a framework, get prioritized, go to market, get iterated, and help to build that muscle so that they can do this themselves. It changes, like, literally night and day the way that they operate.
What's the role of the agency in the new world? Because you're doing all the heavy lifting and all the intellectual stuff, clearly. So what are they doing?
Well, the agencies are still buying media. They're still making ads.
If they heard that, they would be very upset with your definition.
No, but they'd agree with that, right? I mean, they're providing consumer insights. They're buying media. They're managing media. They're building the creative, or developing the creative and the advertising. They're working on content and experiences and other channels. I mean, they're still creating the output.
And let me just say this. I mean,
Okay.
they are often, these teams I described, right? The kids that are on the recess playground that don't want to play together, often the agencies are a big part of that unlock. They're sometimes sitting in the room. To Jason's point, they're doing a lot of the major activities.
I'd argue that they're always sitting there,
I mean,
right?
yeah, and in fact, part of our research showed one of the biggest parts of this recipe in the kitchen, mixing the bowl, whole brain talent was a big unlock on what integrators do versus not. So let me describe what whole brain talent is. You may say, well, okay, McKinsey, what is it? What is whole brain talent? Well, this is not finding a Picasso and an Einstein fused into one brain and one human. That's not what we're talking about. But to Jason's point around translator, what we found is these are creative folks who not only are interested in analytics, but seek those people out, actually love and want to understand what they're doing. And it works both ways. These are analytics folks who are seeking out the creatives to understand what are they doing. In fact, we had one CMO say, there's a misperception out there that my engineers and data scientists are complete motorheads and that my creatives are dreamers. And she said, it's not at all the case. In fact, they keep each other on their toes because they're constantly asking questions about the other field. This is the whole brain talent of the future.
Just sounds so, unreal.
Well, to be fair, it's
in the real world.
Yeah, well, it's the leading edge of the transformation,
Okay.
right? I mean, in mass, companies aren't doing this, right? If they were, we
Sure.
wouldn't have had a
Of
research
course.
study,
Of
and
course.
we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. But there's a percentage of companies today that have acknowledged and recognized and operationalized the ability to create competitive advantage by doing these things. And more, we're going to see companies adopt that. And then eventually it'll be table stakes, and there'll be some new range of competitive advantage that needs to come out. But right now, the ability to have these capabilities at all, then of course integrate those capabilities, creates competitive advantage that, simply will leave your competition in the dust when you master those things.
There is, as you are aware, the big looming threat that consultancies are posing to the survival of agencies. And of course, within agencies, everybody's very scared about their future, given that consultancies are entering this fray very aggressively. Do you see that as people from the consultancy world? Do you see this as a reality going forward, where you will come and you will do the whole circuit, just not part of the circuit, but the whole circuit, and be a full service option for a client?
Well, let me just say this, because I just had a conversation similar to this in the hallway before this discussion with a large agency leader, and we were talking about it, and he said to me, we need you guys. We need McKinsey in there. I said, tell me more. And he says, well, these companies have no idea how to actually work with us in a way that gets the best out of us. With your help in setting up these agile processes and including what we do, we're going to all be better. So that was an interesting view that sort of takes your question, flip it on the head, and I can believe that.
Who is this?
This was an agency leader.
Okay, could you name the person?
I can't name the person.
Okay.
Well, and let me add, consultancies are not one homogeneous group of companies.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So
Yeah.
when there will be some consultancies that decide they want to be full-blown agencies and will compete head-on with the agencies. There are other consultancies that will work within one part of that value chain. And at the end of the day, like we almost don't even concern ourselves with where in there are we playing. We're dealing with the biggest problems for clients, which is driving growth and helping to orchestrate, translate, and help execute the sort of modern marketing transformation. It's hard to be a CMO today. And part of that difficulty is understanding this ecosystem. And I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation, and you're going to see multiple consultants, multiple agencies. I mean, how many clients do we work with? I mean, we're not the only consultant that's in our client relationships. I mean, very often there's multiple consultants in for different topics, and multiple agencies in for different topics.
That sounds like a lot of cooks, doesn't it?
Well, if you can create the swim lanes, and not everybody does that very well, but if you develop the swim lanes and everybody has their place, and there's certain strengths that marketers come to understand each of these parties have, I find we work really well with agencies, we work really well with other consultants, and part of that is us coming in early and having the conversations that help to shape some of those swim lanes as well.
Which brings me to my next question, which is really, in the olden days, the agency on record or the creative partner was the brand custodian, right? So if something went wrong, that person, that agency is to be blamed. Who is the brand custodian, given there are so many specialists and services being offered? Who is the brand custodian? Who takes ownership? if it goes very well or if it fails?
That's such a great question, right? I personally, I think it's the CMO. I think it's the client. And if you look at our research actually showed those integrators, those companies that are growing more than others, are the least likely to have an agency of record, a lead agency that owns the brand, that owns the brand stewardship, and owns the sort of the core idea that then permeates to all of the other parts of the ecosystem. But I think it's the client that owns it.
Well, we actually looked at this recently, and what we found is, and we found this in the research just we recently did as well, and that not only does the client own the consumer, but increasingly those who are performing well, it can't just be one CMO. If he or she doesn't engage the entire organization across the C-suite, the consumer gets lost. We show up like our org chart. And if we as clients show up like our org chart, it's not how the consumer wants to be treated. And so there is a powerful notion of the CMO potentially as the steward, but a servant leader bringing in his or her C-suite peers to actually drive a brand expression that is multifaceted, multidimensional, and by the way, doesn't show up like the org chart looks.
Fair enough. Last question before I let you go. Since you have, interacted with so many CMOs, what are today CMOs struggling with? What is it that is seriously tough, not letting them sleep at night, and problems they're truly grappling with?
I'd say talent is probably one of the biggest poles in the tent. Even the companies that have grown more than others, even the winners in our group, we've heard them tell us time and time again they still can't find the talent that they're looking for. Their talent is certainly better than what you're seeing elsewhere, but they're still struggling with it. I think data is a big topic that we hear about. Being able to unify data when you have a number of different data owners across the organization. And to Brian's point, when the CMO and CTO or CIO, for example, don't work together, you end up with this fractured view of the customer, which means that the same person is going to get one experience in one channel, another experience in another channel. I think that keeps them up at night. I think that the other one, and we work with a spectrum of clients, but the other one that seems to be a challenge sometimes is just funding, right? Being able to manage a budget, for example, between global and regional parts of the organization, between different business units that sometimes compete for dollars. Nothing that's insurmountable, but I'd say those are probably the three biggest that I come across.
And my very last question is, what is wrong with agencies today? It'd be lovely for consultants to spell it out.
Yeah, and I almost might reframe your question of not only what is wrong with agencies, but what is wrong with the system? Because clearly the system isn't performing as everybody would like. I think your point on too many cooks in the kitchen is a great one. I think number one is just figuring out which swim lanes allow us to all perform at our best. That's often a job we're helping CMOs do. I think a second thing is to say, okay, if we've got our swim lanes down, great. How do we operate in those swim lanes in a way we're all going the same direction? Too often we're rowing in different directions with different metrics, and so there's a real opportunity to incentivize all of us in the same way. And then I think finally is, if we actually do this, if we're rowing in the same direction, if we're on the same team, there's an opportunity for us to actually teach each other different capabilities so that 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. And that's this whole integration point. So it does come back to the research. I mean, there's some real insight in there, and it's exciting to see what we'll be here next year talking to Canada.
Well, on that note, I must say it was lovely chatting with both of you, and the world is very complicated and seems to be getting even more complicated going forward. I'm sure next year when I speak with you guys, you'll have new insights and maybe new cooks as well joining this lovely advertising and marketing party. Thank you so much.
We look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you.